hard-working warehouse employee spends 10 years lifting the weight of a company on his back, only to be tossed aside the moment he's hurt. His bills rise, his hope fades, and the people who once praised him now pretend he never existed. But one quiet morning, everything changes when he steps into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. In a world where loyalty seems to break the moment pain enters the picture, Jonah Reeves finds himself standing alone. For years he has shown up early, stayed late, and carried the kind of workload most people wouldn't dare take on. But after a brutal injury leaves him unable to move the way he once did, the company he trusted fires him with no warning, no hearing, and no mercy. His savings drain, his confidence collapses, and every night he wonders how quickly a decade of dedication can vanish into thin air. Yet beneath the weight of fear sits one last spark of belief. The belief that fairness still exists somewhere, that someone will hear him, and that justice, no matter how slow, still finds its way home. Jonah Reeves enters Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom with the quiet presence of a man who has carried far too much for far too long. 34 years old, shoulders still broad from years of warehouse labor, voice steady but worn at the edges. For a decade he served as a senior loader at a regional distribution company, the kind of job where you survive on grit, not comfort, the kind of job where no one notices you until something goes wrong. And for Jonah, everything went wrong on a rainy Tuesday morning. A crate slipped, a metal latch broke, a 1,000-pound pallet tipped just a few inches the wrong way. Moments later, he lay on the cold concrete floor, his lower back burning like fire. One ambulance ride and 2 MRIs later, doctors confirmed a herniated disc so severe he could barely bend. He filed the report, wrote every detail, followed every procedure he'd been trained to do. Then, 2 weeks later, came the message that broke him. The company thanked him for his years of service, then announced they were parting ways. No meeting, no explanation, no support, not even a check for his unused sick days, just a cold termination letter and a reminder to return his badge. Why is loyalty always a one-way street? Jonah's friends told him to let it go. His co-workers whispered about him in the break room. The managers he once protected pretended they didn't know him. But Jonah wasn't built to walk away from what's right. He had rent to pay, therapy sessions scheduled, and a family that depended on him. Most of all, he had a sense of dignity, one he refused to let a corporation erase. So he filed a complaint, then a lawsuit, then found himself sitting before a judge known across the country for his humanity, Judge Frank Caprio. When Judge Caprio begins questioning him, Jonah answers with a calm honesty that fills the room with a heavy silence. He explains the injury, the sudden firing, the ignored calls to HR. The supervisor who told him the company needs strong backs, not sob stories. Each word lands like a quiet blow. Halfway through his explanation, Jonah pauses. He takes a breath, trying to hold himself steady. The courtroom feels the weight of his struggle. A man who never wanted revenge, only fairness. Because what happens to a worker when the company that depended on him decides he's no longer useful? Jonah describes the pain he wakes up with every morning, the sleepless nights, the fear that he might never return to the job he once took pride in. He speaks about his younger sister, whom he supports, his mother's medication, his own medical bills stacking higher every week. The pressure doesn't just sit on his back, it sits on his heart. And yet he sits tall, not out of ego, but out of resolve. It takes courage for a quiet man to stand against a giant, courage to argue against the very people who once signed his paycheck. But Jonah doesn't tremble, he doesn't break, he simply tells the truth. Drop a comment below if you believe a worker's worth should never be determined by how quickly he can lift. Judge Caprio listens, absorbing every detail. And as Jonah finishes his final sentence, the courtroom grows still enough to feel the tension in the air. But what happened next left the entire courtroom speechless. The courtroom settles as Judge Frank Caprio turns his attention to the thick folder resting on his bench, the company's official response. Jonah watches quietly, hands clasped, breath steady. He has no idea what the documents contain. He was never given access, never offered a single chance to defend himself. And now, for the first time, the truth behind his firing is about to surface. Judge Caprio begins reading aloud. According to the company, Jonah Reeves was terminated due to failure to adhere to safety procedures and creating a hazardous environment. The claim hits Jonah like a strike to the chest. For 10 years he trained the new hires on those very safety procedures, He was the one management called when someone cut corners, the one who raised the alarms when equipment malfunctioned, the one who stayed late to prevent accidents, not cause them. How can a company twist a man's dedication into a weapon against him? Judge Caprio continues reading, his voice calm yet firm. The company alleges Jonah lifted the crate recklessly, despite 2 employees previously confirming the latch was old and prone to slipping. But as the judge reads the next statement, something strange happens. A faint tremor ripples through the room. The company also claims Jonah refused medical assistance at the time of injury, a detail so absurd that even Jonah's attorney raises an eyebrow. Jonah remains silent, but the thought echoes inside him, refused help? He remembers the EMT kneeling beside him. He remembers barely being able to breathe. He remembers signing the treatment form because the pain was unbearable. And now the company claims he rejected it? The anger doesn't rise, the disbelief does. Judge Caprio pauses, then asks Jonah a single question: "Did you refuse medical care?" Jonah's response is steady. "No, Your Honor, I begged for it." The courtroom reacts with a soft murmur. This is the first crack in the company's story, and it won't be the last, because just then Jonah's attorney hands Judge Caprio a set of documents that shift the entire atmosphere. These are official hospital treatment papers signed by Jonah and the attending paramedic, time-stamped to the minute, detailed, unmistakable, and directly contradicting company's claims. If that isn't enough, another document follows. An inspection report completed 2 months before Jonah's injury. It states the warehouse pallet rack Jonah was working under had structural instability, warning that failure may result in worker injury. Management had signed off on it. They knew the danger, and they never fixed it. Why do some companies act shocked when the truth they tried to bury finally rises? The room grows still as Judge Caprio reads the inspection report twice. Jonah sits quietly, watching the judge's expression shift from concern to disappointment to something heavier, something closer to outrage. Then comes the final piece. Jonah's attorney presents a transcript of internal emails, obtained legally through discovery, showing that within 48 hours of Jonah's injury, a manager wrote, "We need to cut costs. If this injury becomes expensive, remove him before he files anything." The words land like thunder. Jonah lowers his head for a moment, not out of shame, but relief. The truth he carried alone is no longer silent. For weeks he wondered if anyone would believe him. Now the evidence speaks louder than the lies ever could. Like this video, if you believe every worker deserves honesty from the people who profit off their labor. Judge Caprio closes the file gently. His voice softens but carries weight. There appears to be a significant discrepancy between the company's statements and the documented facts. The company's representative shifts uneasily but stays quiet, knowing any answer might dig the hole deeper. Jonah sits tall, feeling a strength he hasn't felt since the day of his injury. Everything is finally out in the open. And yet, Judge Caprio's expression reveals something more, something Jonah is not prepared for. Because what the judge asks next changes the entire direction of the case. Judge Frank Caprio leans forward, hands clasped, voice steady enough to calm a storm. He looks at Jonah Reeves with a depth that carries both concern and curiosity. Then he asks the question no one expects, a question that pierces straight into Jonah's core. "Mr. Reeves, when did you stop feeling valued?" The room freezes. Jonah doesn't answer right away. He isn't sure he even has words for it, because value isn't something that disappears in a moment. It fades over time, like light slipping through cracked blinds. And now, standing in a courtroom filled with strangers, he feels that question unravel the truth he has been avoiding for years. He takes a slow breath and begins to speak. He explains how, when he first joined the company, they treated him like family. Managers praised his dedication. Co-workers relied on him. For the first few years, he believed he had finally found stability. He worked overtime, covered extra shifts, trained new hires who were younger and stronger. He filled in when the supervisor called in sick. He never complained. He never said no. But then, something changed. A new management team arrived, one obsessed with efficiency numbers, not people. Suddenly, Jonah's years of loyalty didn't matter. He was no longer the man they trusted. He was the man they expected to carry more weight than anyone else. He was the one blamed when shipments ran late, even if he worked through his lunch break. The one scolded for lifting too slowly, even when the crate was stacked wrong. the one overlooked for promotions because, in their words, he was too valuable where he was. Isn't it strange how the people who depend on you most are often the first to replace you? Jonah's voice shakes once, then steadies. He describes the day he reported the broken pallet rack, how the supervisor brushed him off, how he warned them again and again and again, until the morning it nearly crushed him. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't accuse. He simply describes the slow erosion of respect, the way loyalty becomes a burden when it's not returned. As he speaks, something unexpected happens. The company representative, a sharply dressed man in a dark suit, expensive iPhone tucked neatly beside his notes, shifts in his chair, uncomfortable. His jaw tightens, then loosens. His eyes drift downward, no longer meeting the judges. He seems to realize that the corporate shield he came in with is cracking fast. ND. Then Jonah reveals something he's kept hidden from everyone but his doctor. E says the injury didn't just cost him his job, it cost him his sense of self. Every morning he wakes with a burning pain in his back, unsure if he can even bend enough to tie his shoes. He worries whether he'll be able to support his mother's medication next month, whether his sister can stay in school, whether he'll ever lift without fear again, bruh. The courtroom grows painfully quiet. Jonah adds the words that hit the judge hardest, bruh. All I ever wanted was to matter. To them, I didn't. Faint shiver moves through the courtroom. Even the people in the back rows feel it. Because his words carry a truth bigger than a single warehouse, a single accident, a single lawsuit. They reveal the fragile way workers are treated when their strength fades. Hit that subscribe button if you believe no honest worker should ever feel disposable. Judge Caprio takes a long breath before responding, and when he finally speaks, his voice carries a gravity that settles over everyone. E tells Jonah that no one should lose their dignity because of an injury. That loyalty is not something a company buys, it's something earned, and that justice, especially in his courtroom, does not bend based on power or money. UT. Before he can continue, Jonah's attorney rises with one last statement, something the judge did not expect, something that could change the outcome entirely. Because the next revelation threatens to unravel the company's entire defense. Jonah's attorney steps forward with a measured calm, holding a single sheet of paper as though it weighs 1,000 pounds. Judge Frank Caprio gestures for him to proceed, and the attorney clears his throat before unveiling the final revelation. He states that during the discovery process, an anonymous employee sent a confidential statement, a statement claiming that Jonah's termination was not only planned, but coordinated. According to the document, supervisors met days before Jonah was officially fired. They discussed budget cuts, they discussed insurance costs, and then they discussed Jonah by name. The statement claims one manager even said, "If he's hurt, we can't afford to keep him, end it before he makes noise." The room reacts with shock, but Judge Caprio holds up his hand. Silence returns. Jonah remains seated, eyes lowered, absorbing the blow. He always suspected the truth might be ugly, but hearing it spoken aloud strips the last layer of doubt. For 10 years he gave everything to the company, and in a single meeting behind closed doors, they erased him like a name on a dry erase board. Why do some people only appreciate strength when it serves them? Judge Caprio requests the document. He reads it slowly, line by line, and with each sentence, his normally calm demeanor tightens. His jaw sets, his voice deepens when he finishes reading, and he places the paper down with the kind of care that betrays how deeply it affects him. Then, in a tone that carries more weight than a gavel strike, he begins to speak. He says that workplaces often measure a person's worth by numbers, hours logged, crates lifted, targets met. But what they forget is that behind every statistic stands a human being, a person with a heartbeat, a person with bills, a person with dreams and fears and responsibility. And when a company discards that humanity, it doesn't break policy, it breaks trust. He tells the courtroom that the documents, evidence, and testimony paint a troubling picture, not just of negligence, but of deliberate disregard. He says Jonah Reeves did not fail his job failed him. A hush washes across the courtroom. Jonah lifts his eyes, meeting the judge's gaze for the first time since the questioning began. What he finds there is not pity, but resolve. A resolve forged through decades of understanding what justice truly means. Like this video. If you believe every worker deserves protection, not punishment. Judge Caprio continues, explaining that justice must account for more than paperwork and procedure. It must account for fairness, for ethics, for decency, and above all for the truth, even when that truth is inconvenient for those in power. He tells Jonah that he sees him, that he hears him, that his injury did not make him weak, it made him a survivor, and survivors deserve justice, not dismissal. But then something unexpected happens. The company representative rises suddenly, face pale, voice trembling with urgency. He requests permission to address the court directly. Judge Caprio grants it. What comes next shocks everyone. The representative admits the company handled the situation poorly. He admits they regret the lack of communication. But then he tries to shift the blame onto Jonah, claiming Jonah didn't follow up properly, that he should have attended additional evaluations, that the company wasn't aware of his full medical limitations. It's a last-minute attempt to save face. And Judge Caprio sees right through it. He leans forward, voice steady but sharp, and asks the representative a single devastating question: if you were unaware of his limitations, why was he discussed in a meeting about eliminating expensive injuries? The representative freezes. His sigh. NCE answers the question for him. Hit that subscribe button if you believe accountability should never be optional. Judge Caprio prepares to deliver his ruling. The air grows thick with anticipation. Every heart beats a little faster, because whatever comes next will define Jonah's future. And then, with the entire courtroom holding its breath, Judge Caprio makes a decision no one saw coming. The courtroom falls into absolute stillness as Judge Frank Caprio adjusts his glasses, folds his hands, and prepares to deliver a decision that will shape Jonah Reeves's future. Jonah braces for whatever comes next. Compensation, denial, postponement, anything. He only wants fairness. He only wants recognition of the truth he carried alone for far too long. But Judge Caprio takes a moment before speaking, and in that pause, the air becomes heavy enough to feel like gravity itself shifted. Then, in a calm and resonant voice, he delivers a ruling that sends a shockwave through the room. He declares that the company's actions were not just negligent, they were unjust, unethical, and wholly unacceptable. He states that firing a man for getting injured crosses a moral line deeper than any legal threshold, and that this courtroom will not allow a dedicated worker to be punished for the very injury caused by those who failed him. He rules that Jonah is entitled to full compensation for lost wages, ongoing medical expenses, long-term treatment needs, and emotional damages. But then, unexpectedly, he adds something the courtroom did not anticipate. Judge Caprio announces that due to the company's deliberate attempt to conceal evidence, stall accountability, and misrepresent facts, an additional penalty will be imposed, one far more severe than the company imagined. He orders the company to establish a new employee safety fund, a fund named in honor of Jonah Reeves, dedicated to protecting workers from the very negligence that harmed him. And it must be funded by the company's own profits, not insurance, not donors, not loopholes. Their money, their responsibility, their lesson. Why does justice feel so powerful when it finally lands in the right place? Jonah's breath catches. For the first time in months, he feels a weight lift from his shoulders. Not the physical pain, but the invisible burden of being unheard, unbelieved, unvalued. The company representative lowers his head, unable to argue against a ruling built on undeniable truth. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. He turns to Jonah and speaks with a gentleness rarely heard in courtrooms. He tells him that strength is not measured in how much weight a man can lift, but in how much pain he can endure without losing himself. He tells him that his courage helped expose a system of negligence that could have harmed countless others, and that his stand today might save someone else tomorrow. Then comes the moment that leaves the entire courtroom wiping their eyes. Judge Caprio informs Jonah that an anonymous donor, someone who heard about his case and believed in his integrity, has contributed to support Jonah's recovery. Medical therapy, physical treatment, rent support, everything he needs to heal without fear of losing his home. The donor wishes to remain unnamed. No spotlight, no credit, just kindness. Jonah's eyes fill, though he doesn't cry, not out of pride, but because relief can be overwhelming when it arrives after so much struggle. Like this video if you believe one act of fairness can change a life forever. Judge Caprio stands to deliver his final words of the ruling. He tells the courtroom that justice isn't meant to punish, it's meant to restore. It's meant to rebuild what was broken. And today, something in Jonah Reeves's life is finally mending. Then he looks Jonah in the eye and ends with a line that will echo across the internet for years. Your injury changed your body, Jonah, but your courage changed this courtroom. Jonah leaves with his head high, his dignity intact, and a future no longer clouded by fear. The company, humbled and exposed, now carries the responsibility it once tried to abandon, and the safety fund bearing Jonah's name will stand as a reminder of what happens when a worker refuses to stay silent. Hit that subscribe button if you believe justice still has a heartbeat. And yet, as Jonah steps out of the courthouse, he receives a call that changes everything again. But that is a story for another day. Jonah Reeves walks out of the courthouse carrying something he hasn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because life suddenly became easy, and not because pain will disappear overnight, but because justice finally spoke louder than neglect. His story becomes a reminder that every worker deserves dignity, respect, and fair treatment, no matter their role or their rank. And Jonah's courage proves that even when the odds are stacked high, truth still finds a way to rise. Judge Frank Caprio's ruling echoes far beyond the walls of that courtroom. It becomes a symbol of hope for anyone who has ever been mistreated, forgotten, or pushed aside. And if Jonah's journey has touched your heart, let it also strengthen your belief that doing the right thing still matters. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who needs hope today.